The dust cloud from the departing wagon train was already fading into the shimmering August heat when Priscilla Tanner realized with sinking horror that she was standing alone in the empty courtyard of Fort Yuma, California, watching the only people she knew in this God-forsaken territory disappear into the distance. She had stepped away for just a moment, maybe 5 minutes at most, to help an elderly woman who had dropped her knitting needles near the powder magazine. When Priscilla looked up again, the wagons were rolling out through the gates, and nobody had noticed she was missing. Her carpetbag, her food supplies, everything she owned except the calico dress on her back and the worn boots on her feet, all of it was in the third wagon, the one with the torn canvas cover that let the rain in. She started running toward the gates, her skirts kicking up alkali dust, shouting until her throat burned, but the wind carried her voice in the wrong direction, and the iron-rimmed wheels kept turning, kept moving west toward Los Angeles, toward the new life she had planned so carefully after losing everything in Missouri. The fort was nearly deserted, most of the soldiers out on patrol, and the few remaining personnel had disappeared into the shade of the barracks to escape the brutal afternoon sun. Priscilla stood there in the blazing heat, feeling tears prick her eyes but refusing to let them fall. She was 22 years old, alone in Arizona territory in the summer of 1873, with no money, no supplies, and no prospects. The wagon master had made it clear when they left Independence that stragglers would be left behind, that the train waited for no one. But she had never imagined she would be the fool who got forgotten. She walked slowly to the covered ramada near the well, sinking onto the rough wooden bench, trying to think. Fort Yuma sat at the confluence of the Colorado and Gila rivers, a strategic point that made it important to the Army but did nothing to make it hospitable. The temperature regularly climbed past 115 degrees in August, and the nearest civilian settlement of any size was miles away across brutal desert terrain. She could not walk to Los Angeles alone. She would die within a day in this heat without water and protection. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. A single rider was approaching the fort at a hard gallop, and even through the heat shimmer, she could see he was pushing his horse too hard in this weather. The buckskin gelding was lathered with sweat, its sides heaving, and the man sat his saddle with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. He wore a dusty black hat pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a gun belt that had seen hard use. As he drew closer, Priscilla could see he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with several days of dark stubble shadowing his jaw and eyes the color of strong coffee. He reined in his horse near the well, swinging down from the saddle with fluid efficiency, and that was when he saw her. His eyes widened slightly and he glanced around the empty courtyard with a frown. "You are Priscilla Tanner," he said, and it was not a question. "You were with the Carter wagon train. How did you know?" She stood up quickly, hope surging through her chest. "I am Samuel Irving, scout for the train." He pulled off his hat, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "I ride ahead, check the trails, hunt game. I came back to report to Carter about the water situation ahead, and when I got within sight of the train, I counted the people." He looked at her steadily. "You were missing." Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. "They left without me. I was helping someone, and when I turned around, they were gone." Samuel's jaw tightened. Carter should have done a head count before leaving the fort. "That is basic wagon master protocol." He looked westward, calculating distances in his head. "They have maybe 40 minutes on us, less if we push hard." He turned back to her, and something in his expression shifted, became more intense. "You are coming with us." The way he said it, direct and absolute with no room for argument, sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the August heat. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Can you ride?" he asked, already moving toward his horse. "Yes, but you only have one horse." "We will share until we catch up. Come on." He swung back into the saddle, then extended his hand down to her. Priscilla hesitated for only a second before taking it. His palm was calloused, warm and surprisingly gentle as he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's rump, acutely aware that she had to put her arms around Samuel's waist to keep from falling off. "Hold tight," he said, and she felt the rumble of his voice through his back. "This is going to be rough." He was not exaggerating. The moment her arms were secure around him, he urged the buckskin into a canter, heading west out of the fort at a pace that made the landscape blur past them. The horse's gait jostled her violently, and she tightened her grip on Samuel, feeling the solid warmth of him, the play of muscles in his abdomen as he moved with the horse. The intimacy of it made her flush, but there was no alternative, and she was far too grateful to be embarrassed. The sun hammered down on them like a physical weight, and sweat soon soaked through her dress, plastering it to her back. Samuel seemed immune to the heat, his attention focused entirely on the trail ahead, reading signs in the dirt that were invisible to her untrained eyes. After 20 minutes of hard riding, he slowed the horse to a walk, letting the animal catch its breath, and glanced back at her. "You holding up all right?" "Yes," she managed, though her throat was parched and her legs were aching from gripping the horse's sides. He reached for his canteen, uncorked it one-handed and passed it back to her. "Drink. Not too much, just enough to wet your mouth." The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. She forced herself to take only 2 small swallows before handing it back. Samuel took a drink himself, then corked the canteen and urged the horse back into a faster pace. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a harsh landscape of sand, rock, and scrubby creosote bushes that looked like they had given up on living but were too stubborn to die. In the distance, jagged mountains shimmered in the heat, their peaks serrated against the hard blue sky. Priscilla had never felt so small, so vulnerable, as she did crossing this hostile terrain. If Samuel had not come back for her, if he had not noticed she was missing, she would have been stranded at that fort with no way forward and no way back. The thought made her arms tighten around him involuntarily. "I see them," Samuel said suddenly, and Priscilla looked up to see the dust cloud ahead, larger now, more distinct. Relief surged through her again, mixed with an unexpected reluctance. Once they caught up to the train, she would have no more reason to hold on to this stranger, no more excuse to feel the warmth of him against her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the capable strength in every movement he made. It took another 15 minutes of hard riding before they pulled alongside the wagon train. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Jacob Carter with a tobacco-stained beard and hard eyes, looked startled when he saw them approaching. Samuel did not waste time on pleasantries. He rode up beside Carter's lead wagon and fixed him with a stare that could have cut glass. "You left Miss Tanner behind at the fort." Carter's face reddened. "Now, see here, Irving, everyone knows to be ready when the train moves out. If she could not keep up, that is her problem, not mine." "You did not do a head count." Samuel's voice was level, but there was an edge to it that made several nearby riders turn their heads. "You have 37 people in this train. Did you count them before leaving the fort?" Carter shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. "I do not have time to count heads like they are schoolchildren. Everyone knows to be at their wagons when we roll out." Miss Tanner was helping Mrs. Henderson with her knitting needles. She was being a good person, and you abandoned her." Samuel's horse sidestepped, feeling its rider's tension. "If I had not come back to make my report, if I had not counted, she would be stranded at Fort Yuma with no supplies and no way west. In August. Do you understand what that means?" Some of the color drained from Carter's face. Around them, other members of the train had stopped to listen, their faces troubled. A few people were looking at Priscilla with sympathy, and she saw Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman she had helped, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes bright with tears. "I made a mistake," Carter said finally, grudgingly. "It will not happen again." "No, it will not," Samuel agreed, "because from now on you will do a head count before every departure, and you will assign someone to double-check that everyone is accounted for. Those are the terms. If you do not agree, I will take Miss Tanner and anyone else who wants to come with me, and you can find your own way through Apache country without a scout." The threat hung in the air like the dust around them. Carter clearly wanted to argue, but he was not stupid enough to travel through this territory without an experienced scout. After a long moment, he nodded curtly. "Agreed." Samuel did not acknowledge the victory. He simply guided his horse toward the third wagon, the one with the torn canvas, and helped Priscilla slide down from the horse. Her legs wobbled when her feet hit the ground, and his hands steadied her, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Your wagon?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." She looked up at him, trying to put everything she felt into those two inadequate words. "You saved my life today." Something flickered in his dark eyes, gone too quickly for her to identify. "Just doing my job, Miss Tanner," but they both knew it was more than that. He could have reported her absence to Carter and let the wagon master decide whether to turn back. He could have ridden ahead to relay his information and left her behind. Instead, he had come for her himself, pushed his horse hard in brutal heat, and confronted Carter in front of the entire train to ensure it would not happen again. As the train began moving again, Priscilla climbed into her wagon and found her carpetbag exactly where she had left it. She dug out a clean handkerchief and pressed it to her face, letting herself shake for just a moment with the delayed shock of everything that had happened. Through the torn canvas, she could see Samuel riding ahead, resuming his position as scout, and she watched him until he was just a dark speck against the endless horizon. That night, when the train circled for camp near a spring that Samuel had located, Priscilla helped the other women prepare the evening meal. Mrs. Henderson would not stop apologizing, her wrinkled face creased with guilt, and Priscilla had to reassure her a dozen times that it was not her fault. As the sun set in a glory of orange and purple, painting the desert in shades of fire, Samuel rode back into camp with 2 jackrabbits slung over his saddle. He did not join the main group around the fire. Instead, he made his own small camp at the edge of the circle, and Priscilla watched him skin and gut the rabbits with efficient, practiced movements. He worked quickly, his hands sure and steady, and soon had the meat roasting over his fire. The smell made her mouth water, reminding her that she had not eaten since a hasty breakfast at dawn. She made a decision. Taking her own plate of beans and cornbread, she walked over to his fire. He looked up as she approached, surprise flashing across his face. "May I join you?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded, gesturing to a flat rock near the fire. "It is your choice." She sat down, arranging her skirts, and for a moment they ate in silence. The desert night was coming alive around them with sounds that were alien to her Missouri-bred ears. The yip of coyotes in the distance, the rustle of creatures in the brush, the endless chirp of insects. The sky above was turning deep indigo, and the first stars were appearing, more stars than she had ever seen in her life, a vast glittering sweep that made her feel dizzy when she looked up. "Why do you camp alone?" she asked finally. Samuel turned the rabbit on his spit, not looking at her. "Habit. I spent 3 years as an Army scout before I started working for wagon trains, got used to my own company. You do not like people, I like people fine. I just do not need them around me all the time." He glanced at her, and in the firelight his eyes were soft, almost golden. Present company accepted. The warmth that had flooded through her when he pulled her onto his horse returned, stronger now. She looked down at her plate, suddenly shy. "I never properly thanked you for what you did today. You thanked me. 2 words are not enough for saving someone's life." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was lower, more intimate. "I was afraid when I realized you were missing. Real fear, the kind that makes your hands shake. I have seen what this desert does to people who are not prepared for it. The thought of you alone at that fort with no water, no supplies, no way to get help." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I pushed Ranger harder than I should have to get back to you. Ranger," he gestured to the buckskin who was hobbled nearby, contentedly cropping at the sparse grass. "He has been with me for 4 years, best horse I have ever owned." Priscilla smiled. "Then I owe him thanks too." She paused, gathering her courage. "Why did you count the people? What made you think to do that?" "Because I pay attention." Samuel pulled the rabbit off the fire, testing the meat with his knife. "A good scout does not just watch the trail ahead. He watches everything. The people, the animals, the supplies, the weather. You notice patterns, and when something breaks the pattern, you investigate." He cut a portion of the rabbit and offered it to her on a tin plate. "You broke the pattern. I had seen you every day for the past 3 weeks, always helping someone, always moving around the camp. When I looked at the train and did not see you, it felt wrong." She took the meat, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and that simple touch sent electricity up her arm. "You have been watching me." "I watch everyone," he said, but there was color in his cheeks now, barely visible in the firelight. "It is my job. Is that all it is?" The question hung between them, bold and dangerous. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, the struggle between what he wanted and what he thought was proper. "No," he said finally, quietly. "That is not all it is." Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Then what is it?" He set down his plate and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense on hers. "I noticed you the second day out of Independence. You were wearing a green dress, and you were teaching the Taylor children how to identify birds. You made them laugh, really laugh, in a way that made me realize how serious and scared most of them had been." He shook his head slowly. "Since then, I have found myself looking for you every time I ride back to camp, wondering what you are doing, who you are talking to, if you are all right. When I realized you were gone today, when I understood that you had been left behind, something in my chest just stopped working for a minute." Priscilla could not breathe. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty, such unguarded emotion. The men she had known in Missouri had been either painfully shy or crudely forward, but Samuel was neither. He was simply truthful, laying out his feelings like cards on a table, letting her see everything. "I have been watching you too," she whispered. "Every time you ride back into camp, I find an excuse to be where I can see you. I tell myself it is because you are interesting, because you are different from anyone I have ever met, but that is not the whole truth either." "What is the whole truth?" She met his eyes steadily. "I think about you constantly. I replay conversations we have never had. I imagine what it would be like to know you better, to hear you laugh, to see you in the morning when you first wake up." Her cheeks were burning now, but she did not look away. "Today, when you pulled me onto your horse, when I put my arms around you, It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like I was supposed to be there, holding on to you, trusting you completely. Samuel stood up abruptly and walked to the edge of the firelight, his back to her, his shoulders tight. For a terrible moment, Priscilla thought she had said too much, had frightened him away with her boldness. Then he turned back, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Miss Tanner, I am a scout. I spend most of my time alone in the wilderness, sleeping on the ground, eating whatever I can shoot or trap. I do not have a home, do not have land or prospects or anything a woman like you should want in a man. But if you are saying what I think you are saying, if you are telling me that you feel even a fraction of what I feel when I look at you, then I need you to know that I will do everything in my power to become worthy of that feeling." She stood up too, crossing the distance between them, her heart pounding. "Samuel, I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. I lost everything in Missouri. My parents died of cholera and creditors took our farm. I am going to Los Angeles with $40 in my pocket and a cousin I have never met who may or may not want me living with her. I do not have prospects either, but I have myself, and I have the ability to see a good man when I meet one, and you are the best man I have ever known." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough, warm, and she leaned into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "Priscilla," he said, and her name in his mouth was a prayer, a promise. "I want to court you properly. I want to do this right. But we only have 3 more weeks before we reach Los Angeles, and then I am supposed to ride back east to pick up another train, and the thought of leaving you, of never seeing you again, is intolerable to me." "Then do not leave," she said simply. "Stay in California. We can figure out the rest together." He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closing, and they stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, adjusting to the enormity of what they had just admitted to each other. Around them, the desert night sang its strange song, and the fire crackled and popped, and Priscilla felt more at home than she had since her parents died. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of heat, dust, and stolen moments. Samuel still rode ahead each day to scout the trail, but now he found reasons to fall back to the wagon train more frequently, to check on supplies or relay information, and each time he appeared, Priscilla's heart would leap in her chest. They talked whenever they could, long conversations about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, dreams, fears. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's flower garden and her father's terrible singing voice, about the devastating emptiness that cholera left behind. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to track from a Comanche man who befriended his father, about the years he spent drifting from job to job until he found his calling as a scout. They were always careful to maintain propriety, aware of the watching eyes around them, but the connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes their hands would brush when he helped her down from her wagon, and that simple contact would send warmth flooding through her entire body. Other times, she would catch him watching her from across the camp, and the intensity in his gaze would make her flush and look away, thrilled and overwhelmed in equal measure. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself their unofficial chaperone, always finding reasons to be nearby when they talked, but she did so with such kind conspiracy that neither of them minded. The older woman had been devastated by her inadvertent role in Priscilla's near disaster at Fort Yuma, and she seemed determined to make amends by ensuring that this romance, so clearly blooming in the desert heat, would flourish properly. 2 weeks into the journey from Fort Yuma, the train crossed into California, following the Gila River west through increasingly rugged terrain. The landscape shifted from pure desert to rocky foothills, and the heat, while still intense, became slightly more bearable. Samuel rode back into camp one evening with news that they would reach Warner's ranch within 3 days, and from there, it was less than a week to Los Angeles. The announcement was met with cheers and celebration, but Priscilla felt only a growing dread. Los Angeles meant the end of the journey, the end of her time with Samuel, the end of this bubble of possibility they had been living in. That night, she found him at his usual spot at the edge of camp, and this time she did not ask permission before sitting down beside him. He smiled when he saw her, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face and shifted to make room for her on his bedroll. 3 more days to Warner's ranch, she said, keeping her voice light. You must be relieved. This train has been slow and difficult. It has been the best job I have ever had, he said quietly, and the weight of meaning in those words made her throat tight. What happens when we reach Los Angeles? He did not answer right away, staring into the fire. I have been thinking about that constantly. I told you I would do everything in my power to become worthy of you, and I meant it. I have some money saved up, about $300. It is enough to make a start somewhere if I am smart about it. A start at what? I am a good tracker. I know the land, know how to read weather and water, know animals and plants. There are ranchers in California who need men like me, men who can manage land, find lost cattle, scout for water. He looked at her, his expression serious. It would not be easy at first. It would mean hard work, long hours, probably living in a lined shack or a room above someone's barn. But it would be honest work, steady work, the kind of work that could lead to something more. Priscilla's heart was beating very fast. Are you asking me something, Samuel? He turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. I am saying that I love you, Priscilla Tanner. I have loved you since that day at Fort Yuma when I realized you were missing and my whole world narrowed down to one single purpose: finding you, bringing you back, keeping you safe. I know we have only known each other for 5 weeks. I know that is not very long, and maybe you need more time, and if you do, I will give it to you. But I also know that some things do not need time. Some things are just true from the moment they begin. She was crying now, tears spilling down her cheeks, but she was smiling too, and she squeezed his hands tight. I love you too. I love your steadiness, your competence, the way you see everything and everyone. I love how you speak plainly, without games or pretension. I love that you came back for me when no one else even noticed I was gone. And you are right that some things do not need time. I knew that day on your horse with my arms around you that I never wanted to let go. Samuel made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, pressing her face against his chest, feeling the rapid thunder of his heart against her cheek. They held each other for a long time, and it was Mrs. Henderson's gentle cough from the shadows that finally made them pull apart, both laughing a little at being caught. I am going to speak to your cousin when we arrive in Los Angeles, Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. I am going to ask her permission to court you properly, and if she says yes, I am going to find work immediately. I am going to save every penny I can, and as soon as I have enough to provide for you decently, I am going to ask you to marry me. Will you wait for me? Will you give me that chance? Yes, she said, and it was the easiest answer she had ever given. Yes to all of it. Los Angeles in 1873 was a dusty pueblo of about 6,000 people, a sprawling collection of adobe buildings and wooden structures clustered around the old plaza. Priscilla's cousin, Margaret, turned out to be a warm, practical woman in her late 30s who ran a boarding house near the center of town. She was delighted to have Priscilla to help with the endless work of cooking, cleaning, and managing guests. And when Samuel appeared at her door the day after they arrived, hat in hand and eyes serious, Margaret listened to his carefully rehearsed speech about his intentions, and then laughed until tears ran down her face. "Young man," she said, wiping her eyes, "I watched the way you two looked at each other when the train arrived. I may be old, but I am not blind. If you want to court my cousin, you have my blessing, but I expect you to do it properly. No sneaking around, no impropriety, and I want to meet with you once a week to hear about your progress and your prospects." Samuel agreed to all her terms with visible relief, and that very afternoon he went out to find work. By evening, he had 3 offers: one from a rancher south of town who needed a foreman, one from a local merchant who wanted a guide for pack trains through the mountains, and one from the sheriff, who was looking for a deputy with tracking skills. He took the deputy position, reasoning that it offered steady pay, respect, and the crucial advantage of keeping him in Los Angeles instead of sending him out on long trips away from Priscilla. For the next 6 months, they courted with Margaret as their hawk-eyed chaperone. Samuel came to the boarding house every evening he was not working, and they would sit in the parlor or on the front porch, talking for hours while Margaret pretended to sew and actually listened to every word. On Sundays, when Samuel had the day off, they would go for long walks around the pueblo, exploring the dusty streets, the old mission church, the markets where Mexican and American merchants sold everything from vegetables to saddles. Slowly, carefully, they built a life together from words and glances and held hands when Margaret was not watching too closely. Samuel proved to be an excellent deputy. He had a knack for calming tense situations, for tracking down stolen property, for reading people the way he read trails. The sheriff, a gruff man named Thomas Mackenzie, took a liking to him and began training him in the legal side of law enforcement. The pay was decent, $50 a month plus room in the jail's small apartment, and Samuel saved almost every penny, living on beans and bread, walking instead of riding when he could, denying himself everything except the books he bought because Priscilla loved to read and he wanted to discuss them with her. On a warm evening in March 1874, 9 months after they first met, Samuel appeared at the boarding house with wildflowers clutched in one hand and his hat in the other. Margaret took one look at his face and hustled the other boarders out of the parlor, giving them privacy for the first time in months. Samuel knelt down on the worn wooden floor, and Priscilla's breath caught in her throat. "I have $480 saved," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Sheriff Mackenzie is retiring next month, and he recommended me as his replacement. The town council is voting on it next week, but he thinks it is going to pass. The sheriff makes $90 a month, Priscilla, and there is a house that comes with the job, a real house with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen and a yard for a garden. It is not much, but it is a start, and it is more than I ever thought I would have." He took a deep breath. "I know I promised to wait until I could provide for you decently, and I think that time has come. So I am asking you now, in front of your cousin and God and anyone else who wants to listen, Priscilla Tanner, will you marry me?" She dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, Samuel Irving, I will marry you. I would have married you with $40 and a bedroll under the stars, but I will marry you with a house and a garden too." They were wed 2 weeks later in the old Plaza Church, with Margaret and Sheriff Mackenzie standing as witnesses, and half the town crowding into the pews to watch. Priscilla wore a dress that Margaret had helped her sew from pale blue calico, and Samuel wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable and handsome in equal measure. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with such reverence, such joy, that several women in the congregation openly wept. The house that came with the sheriff position was small but sturdy, with whitewashed walls and a red tile roof that kept the interior blessedly cool even in summer heat. Priscilla spent the first weeks of their marriage turning it into a home, sewing curtains, planting flowers and vegetables in the yard, learning to cook on the iron stove that terrified and delighted her. Samuel would come home each evening, and the look of wonder on his face when he walked through the door, the disbelief that this was his life now, never faded. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Samuel's work as sheriff was often dangerous, dealing with drunks and thieves and the occasional violent criminal, and Priscilla learned to live with a low-level anxiety that he might not come home one evening. But he was careful and smart, and he had a gift for de-escalation that kept him out of most gunfights. The town prospered under his quiet leadership, and the residents grew to trust and respect the steady young man who had drifted in with a wagon train and decided to stay. In the spring of 1875, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully, and was rewarded by an expression of such pure, incandescent joy that she started crying again. He dropped to his knees beside her chair and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his shoulders shaking, and she ran her fingers through his dark hair and thought about how far they had both come from that burning August day at Fort Yuma. Their son was born in January 1876, a healthy baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Sheriff Mackenzie, and the old man cried when they told him, insisting he was too honored and too undeserving of the tribute. Little Thomas proved to be a demanding baby, colicky and fussy, but Priscilla managed with the help of Margaret and the other women in town who had taken her under their collective wing. Samuel was a devoted father, coming home during his lunch break just to hold his son, walking the floor with the baby at night so Priscilla could sleep, marveling aloud at the perfection of tiny fingers and toes. The years rolled past in a blur of work and love, and the ordinary challenges of building a life together. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose born in 1878, and another son named James in 1880. The sheriff's salary increased as Los Angeles grew, and Samuel invested carefully, buying a small orange grove on the outskirts of town that Priscilla managed while he worked. The grove prospered, adding significantly to their income, and by 1885 they were able to build a larger house with room for their growing family and a proper study where Samuel could work on town business in the evenings. Through it all, they never lost the sense of wonder at finding each other, at the sheer unlikely chance that had brought them together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Priscilla on a trip back to Fort Yuma, now a fading outpost as the railroad changed trade routes and military priorities shifted. They stood in the dusty courtyard where she had waited alone, terrified and abandoned, and Samuel pulled her close. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come back?" he asked quietly. "Every day," she admitted. "Not in a sad way, but in a grateful way. I think about all the tiny decisions that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If I had not stopped to help Mrs. Henderson, if you had not decided to count the people, if you had been 5 minutes slower riding back to the fort." She shook her head. "It feels like destiny, but I know it was really just luck and your particular brand of careful attention." "I prefer to think it was inevitable," Samuel said, tilting her face up to kiss her. "I like the idea that no matter what happened, we were always going to find each other." They returned to Los Angeles and their children, their orange grove, their life that had grown rich and full beyond anything either of them had imagined that burning day in August 1873. Samuel served as sheriff for 20 years before retiring to manage the orange groves full-time, becoming a respected elder statesman in the rapidly growing city. Priscilla became known for her charity work, particularly with women traveling west alone, and she never forgot the terror of being stranded and the miracle of being found. Their children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how their father had ridden back through the desert heat to rescue their mother, how a moment of inattention had led to a lifetime of love. Thomas became a lawyer, Rose married a doctor and moved to San Francisco, and James took over the orange groves, expanding them into a significant business. Samuel and Priscilla watched their family grow with pride and deep contentment, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting from the most fragile of beginnings. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1904, Samuel was 60 years old and Priscilla was 56. They hosted a celebration at their home, now a sprawling ranch-style house surrounded by acres of orange trees, and their children, grandchildren, friends, and half the old guard of Los Angeles came to celebrate. Margaret, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, gave a rambling toast about young love and proper courtship that had everyone laughing until they cried. When the guests finally departed and they were alone, Samuel took Priscilla's hand and led her out to the porch, where they could see the lights of Los Angeles spreading below them like fallen stars. "You have any regrets?" he asked, the same question he asked her every year on their anniversary. "Not a single one," she said, the same answer she always gave because it was true. "You? Only that I did not kiss you that first night by the fire when you told me you had been watching me too. I wasted 3 weeks being proper when I could have been kissing you." She laughed, the sound as clear and bright as it had been 30 years before. "You can kiss me now and make up for lost time." So he did, there on the porch of their home, with the orange blossoms perfuming the night air and the city they had helped build glowing softly in the distance. And if the kiss tasted of 30 years of partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared, of children raised and businesses built, and a love that had only deepened with time, that only made it sweeter. They had started with nothing but each other, with a moment of crisis in a dusty fort and a decision by a careful man to count the people in his care. From that simple beginning, they had built an empire of love, family, and belonging. Samuel had found what he was searching for in the endless desert landscapes, and Priscilla had discovered that being forgotten could be the first step toward being truly found. Together, they had proved that sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned, and the truest homes are the ones you build from trust, courage, and the absolute certainty that you will always ride back for each other, no matter how far the distance or how harsh the terrain. Their story became legend in Los Angeles, passed down through generations of their descendants, a reminder that love can bloom in the unlikeliest places, and that the smallest acts of attention and care can change the entire trajectory of a life. And every year on their anniversary, until Samuel passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and Priscilla followed him just 6 months later, as if she could not bear to be parted from him even in death, they would raise a glass to Fort Yuma, to second chances, to the power of noticing when something breaks the pattern, and having the courage to ride back through the heat to make things right.